Chase Claypool gone to the Miami Dolphins. Khalil Herbert injured with a high ankle sprain that could keep him out a few games. But the good news is the Chicago Bears are about to get a lot healthier in the secondary.
You are Locked On Bears, your daily Chicago Bears podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Bears, and I'm your host, Lauren Cox. I'm here to bring you your daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. You can follow me on Twitter at CoxSports1. You can follow the podcast on Twitter at Locked On Bears. You can like Locked On Bears on Facebook, join the Locked On Bears Facebook group for even more Bears talk, and make sure you hit that subscribe button on the Locked On Bears YouTube channel to keep up with all of our video podcasts as well. Thanks for making Locked On Bears your first listen today. We're part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook, official sportsbook of Locked On. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can bet $5 and get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. Visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn to get started. On the show today, we got to catch up on sort of the transactional/injury news surrounding this Chicago Bears team from over the weekend. Chase Claypool being traded to the Miami Dolphins on Friday, perhaps not so unexpected, but the timing, a little bit of a surprise there right after the game against the Commanders, plus an injury update on Khalil Herbert, who left and then sort of came back, but then left again against the Commanders and could be out for a little while, and a replacement already brought in for short term in the building, but also some good injury news coming in the secondary with sounds like a positive prognosis for some of the injured cornerbacks and safeties that maybe all could be potentially coming back as soon as this week against the Vikings. But let's start with the Chase Claypool trade. It feels like it was a while ago now, even though it was just Friday. But when you play a Thursday night game, the whole internal clock and calendar thing really gets all thrown off for me. So it feels like it's been a minute since Chase Claypool was traded, but we haven't had a podcast since then because post-game Commanders was first thing Friday morning and Claypool was traded later that day. But the era is over. Less than a full calendar year with the Chicago Bears, and Chase Claypool is gone. The Bears never won a game while Chase Claypool was here. He never was on the field for a win. I don't think the team won any games since acquiring Chase Claypool. Well, I guess except for this one against the Commanders, which he wasn't on the field for. So it was clearly a disaster. It was clearly the worst individual transaction of of Ryan Poles' tenure as a general manager so far. He got it wrong, and it's a bad look. And there's no, excusing it away or defending it or making it seem not as bad or why, he shouldn't feel like he messed that one up. Like that one is a pretty squarely, my bad. And trading, the 32nd overall pick, which you didn't know, but a second round pick for Chase Claypool last year, and then trading him away to the Miami Dolphins in exchange for a late draft pick swap the following year is Ryan Poles admitting his mistake, saying, yep, I thought this guy was going to be better. We put a lot of time, effort, and faith in this guy being a big part of our offense and being worth that second round pick, and we were wrong. You don't trade him like this mid-season for peanuts if you're not ready to admit you're wrong, right? The general manager who's not ready to admit he's wrong keeps putting Claypool out there, keeps forcing him as a part of this offense and trying to make the Claypool thing work until the very end of the season. That would be a stubborn general manager who won't admit when he messed up. Trading him to the Miami Dolphins is admitting that he messed up. And I appreciate that from your general manager, right? I want the general manager who will admit his mistake rather than try and resist it and fight it and pretend like it wasn't a mistake or talk around it or justify it in some way, shape, or form. Like, he does deserve some credit for being able to do that and cut his losses early there rather than really doubling down, sinking in, and trying to make something happen. And maybe, continuing to harm or worsen or just hold back the team as a result. Now, of course, you would also rather have the GM who doesn't make the mistake in the first place, right? Saying that giving him credit for admitting his mistake does not absolve him from blame for having made the mistake. I mean, it's got to go down as one of the worst trades in Chicago Bears history. I mean, I'm not old enough to, dig back deep in the Chicago Bears history archives, but for a guy to be given up to give up such a high second round pick to get a guy who did as close to nothing as you could get over the course of, just one calendar year is as abysmal as you can get. I do, though, want to make sure we apply the proper context to when the trade was made. A couple of factors at the time. I think we understood, when you talk about process versus results, the results for Claypool, bad. As bad as you could possibly get. The process, less bad. I'm not going to say good, but less bad. No one thought it would be that disastrous. Maybe Claypool never would amount to anything in Chicago, but we thought that we'd get more than that. I think we could all agree at the time it felt like an overpay. They gave up a really early the earliest of the second round picks, we would later find out, to get Chase Claypool. And at the time, we all thought, yeah, that was a little bit much. It was also reported then and reiterated now that the Green Bay Packers were also offering their second round pick at the time. And so the Chicago Bears upped their offer to include their second round pick that the that the Steelers then thought would be earlier. And so that's why they ended up sending Claypool to the Bears. But it's not as though, Ryan Poles overspent on his own or was bidding against nobody, right? There was clearly multiple teams interested in Claypool. So the overspend is still an overspend, but it wasn't like he got fooled, right? There were other teams also willing to spend that much, so he was paying what the market was demanding. Similarly, we talked about it at the time, and so this is not like 2020 hindsight here or anything, but when they traded for Chase Claypool, we think Ryan Poles, and he kind of admitted this too later on in the process, that he was looking ahead during last season. He looked ahead to free agency which would have been, this past free agency, but at the time, future free agency, and saw the wide receiver market was barren. It was, Juju Smith-Schuster and Nelson Aguilar. These were the top wide receivers that hit free agency this year. A couple of the other young kid from New England whose name is escaping me right now, but it was a bunch of, there were no proven wide receivers set to hit free agency this year. And so Ryan Poles looked at Chase Claypool as it's like, all right, I got to go get a wide receiver for Justin Fields. And he didn't know at the time that he was going to get DJ Moore, but that was his opportunity to get a better wide receiver option, he thought, in Claypool than any of the guys that would hit free agency. And so he swung for the fences there. And of course, it looks worse because DJ Moore is here and playing so well, so you don't need Claypool as much. So it was a lot to give up for a guy that was useless. But if the Bears hadn't got the number one overall pick and hadn't traded for DJ Moore, what would this wide receiving core look like right now? I mean, Darnell Mooney, Tyler Scott, Equinemius St. Brown, Velus Jones, Claypool all of a sudden would have been that much more valuable to the Bears and probably got the ball more, and maybe they'd be in a bigger mess if Claypool wasn't successful here. And you'd criticize Ryan Poles for not having done enough at wide receiver. So, again, bad move by Ryan Poles, and one that's going to haunt him as a general manager and justify a lot of the criticism that he receives as general manager. Hell, might even lead to him being fired as general manager, depending on how the rest of this season goes. But it wasn't 100% all bad. There was some good idea behind the process, but clearly not the right player to go after, not the right fit, and at least he admitted his mistake at the end. So it's the end of a Claypool era. We kind of know how it's going to go. I mean, I honestly think he'll be fairly successful in Miami. I mean, relatively for his career. I don't think it'll be a disaster in Miami. Claypool's an emotional player, right? He gets upset when the team's losing and he's not getting the ball. But in Miami, the team's going to win, and he may get the ball a little bit more. So I think he'll be happy there and get along just fine. He's not going to have 1,000 yards or anything, but he'll be all right. I don't think it's going to be a disaster. I think it's a good move for Miami to give up peanuts for a guy that might still be able to contribute in that offense and help them out a little bit once he gets up to speed. So best of luck to Chase Claypool, but he's no longer the Chicago Bears problem. The Chicago Bears problem right now is getting healthy and trying to stay healthy. And fortunately, they're making some progress now 5 weeks into the season. We'll check in on some encouraging developments from this Bears secondary, plus some real questions at running back moving forward next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel Sportsbook, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, FanDuel is giving new customers the opportunity to get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed All you have to do is just place a $5 bet on anything. Literally, win or lose, whatever you bet on, you just bet $5 with our promo code LOCKEDONNFL, and then FanDuel will add $200 to your account in bonus bets, win or lose. Doesn't matter if your bet's correct or it's not. You make the bet, FanDuel adds that much money back into your account as an extra, so you can bet on anything you want. Doesn't have to be the Bears, but certainly you can get your odds for this week against the Minnesota Vikings, where, of course, as you might expect, the Bears are road underdogs, a 3-point spread right now at FanDuel Sportsbook, or, of course, plenty of player props, over-unders, and so much more. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and kick off the NFL season. FanDuel, an official partner of the NFL. The Chicago Bears have had injuries really hit at concentrated spots across this roster. It's not like you're dabbling, you lose a defensive lineman here and a tight end there and a linebacker here. And, it's been very, very concentrated at specific positions. Offensive line has lost a few different guys. Now we're seeing running back is down. Your top 3 guys are all hurt. We'll get into that in a minute. And, of course, in the secondary, we've seen 5 backups on the field at times in the secondary. Cornerbacks injured, safeties injured, rotating multiple guys the same spots back there injured. And eventually with these injuries, those guys start to get healthy. And it feels like we're starting to reach that point in the secondary when there's going to be what feels like reinforcements coming on the back end. Because, first of all, Jaylon Johnson said in an interview on, I think it's 670 The Score, not ESPN Chicago, one of the Chicago radio stations that he appears on weekly, he came out and said, yep, I'm going to play next week against the Minnesota Vikings. No doubt about it. Like, basically is eliminating any kind of competitive advantage mystery that usually the Bears try and hold on to throughout practice during the week. But Jaylon Johnson says, I'm playing against the Minnesota Vikings. So boom, all of a sudden, you're for sure back one of your injured cornerbacks on the outside. Terrell Smith, the rookie, had been playing very well for a 5th-round pick, starting opposite of another rookie, Tyreek Stevenson. But good to have Jaylon Johnson back for now. We'll see how close to 100% he ends up getting, but good to have your starting great veteran cornerback back out there. He's the one we know for sure as far as reinforcements coming to an already depleted secondary there. But if my math is correct, we should be getting Kyler Gordon back as soon as this week, and I have a feeling we might see Eddie Jackson back as well. So when Kyler Gordon got injured before week 1, or I don't remember exactly but when he was placed on injured reserve, I guess, before week 1, but after the 53-man roster deadline, Matt Eberflus said he's having surgery on his hand or his wrist or whatever that was. And the quote from Matt Eberflus was, we expect him back after the Washington game. So we just finished up the Washington game. You got a 10-day break here before the next game against the Vikings. I would expect today or tomorrow or Wednesday or whenever the Bears get kind of back going again. I don't know how it works with the extra time off. The Bears will announce that Kyler Gordon has entered his 21-day window to return, because on injured reserve, he had to miss a minimum of 4 weeks. And that we have now missed, we're now at the sort of the 4-week mark. And so, or next, we're now at the 5-week mark with the Washington game. And so they're ready to bring him back. And when he said before we're expecting him back after the Commanders game, to me, that signals like, all right, we should at least see the window to return to practice. That means he can practice this week and see if he's ready to go for Minnesota. Maybe he'll need he'll have 3 weeks before he can come back, or 3 weeks open time to come back if he wants to. So it doesn't have to be right away this week. But I would imagine, they'll start practicing him and see how that goes. And maybe he even plays with a club or something. But I think there's a decent chance we could see Kyler Gordon back this week. So maybe all 3 of your cornerbacks would be healthy, and have Gordon back in the slot, and Stevenson and Johnson on the outside would go a long way towards rejuvenating the secondary that's getting ready to face Justin Jefferson and Kirk Cousins, although Jefferson also got hurt in the Vikings game this week, so we'll see what his injury status is going to be. And I think there's even maybe a long shot chance that Eddie Jackson could come back here too. This one is not based on, I'm not reporting anything or trying to cite any sources or anything here. This one's just math for me, is that Eddie Jackson played the first 2 games and has not played since. Eddie Jackson, popped up on the injury report for week 3 and missed. Week 3 was the first game he missed. If the Bears thought Eddie Jackson was going to miss 4 or more games, they would have put him on injured reserve, because injured reserve, you have to be out a minimum of 4 weeks. And when Eddie Jackson was injured, if you think he's going to be hurt 4 or longer, you put him on IR and have the roster spot. If you think he's going to miss 3 or less, you keep him on the active roster, but just injured because you think he's going to be back sooner than what injured reserve would grant you. He got hurt after week 2. We are now 3 weeks later. So if he misses this week against the Vikings, it would be 4 weeks injured. And so if he's going to have missed 4 games, why not have put him on the injured reserve? I think they expect him, or when he first got hurt, they expected him to be back by this Vikings game. Otherwise, they would have put him on injured reserve and taken the minimum of 4 games, because if he misses the Vikings game, that would be 4 games. Certainly there's a chance that they estimated how long he would be out and misestimated or underestimated, or there's a chance something ended up getting worse than it was originally, like it was tweaked or worsened or somehow and then he's been out longer. But the fact that he still hasn't gone on injured reserve suggests to me that it didn't get worse, because if it got worse, then you throw him on IR and miss another 4 weeks from there, right? Like, you'd think if at any point they thought he was going to be out for longer than 3 weeks, they would put him on injured reserve. So to me, unless it's just like they guessed it would be less than 4 and it's ended up lingering a little bit longer, it would suggest to me that this extra break, again, with the 10 days between the Thursday night game and next Sunday, would be more time for Eddie Jackson to get back healthy and potentially come back and play in this game. Like, it's to the point where, again, we're stretching a little bit for Eddie and maybe Kyler, but like, Jaylon Johnson's back. Kyler Gordon, they've said before they expect him to be back this week. And the math says Eddie Jackson, in theory, should be, if they play this correctly, should be ready to start coming back this week. It's not to guarantee that either Gordon or Jackson will play, but at the very least, they should start practicing a little bit more and get closer to 100%, so that you can have, perhaps for the first time since all season, really, your fully healthy starting 5 in your secondary. Jaylon Johnson, Tyreek Stevenson, Kyler Gordon in the slot, and then Jackson and Brisker behind them. That would go a long way towards maintaining some of the momentum that this defense has gotten in the last 2 weeks. Not that they've been stellar, but it has felt like some level of progress from a group that was abysmal the first 4 weeks of the season, and now they're a little bit less than abysmal. And again, playing a tougher matchup in the Minnesota Vikings, one of the better passing teams in the league statistically. For a while there, Kirk Cousins was the leading quarterback in the NFL. I'm not sure if he still is at this stretch, but anytime there's a Justin Jefferson, Kirk Cousins lineup on the other side, you want to be as healthy as possible in the secondary. And of course, you need your pass rush to be better and all that other stuff too, but it certainly can't hurt getting all those guys back. And I really want to see Kyler Gordon in particular, because he was looking so sharp in the preseason, and I thought this is when we can start to see him get more comfortable. But if he's got a club on his hand, or if he's not 100%, we can't evaluate Kyler Gordon too harshly in his first game back from injury if we don't think he's going to be 100%. But fingers crossed that there's going to be at least some, for sure, with Jaylon Johnson, reinforcements in the secondary. Maybe 2 with Kyler Gordon, and a long shot, but not 0% chance Eddie Jackson can make all 3 guys all coming back at the same time for a big divisional game. Good news in the secondary. Less good news in the backfield on offense, where the top 3 running backs on your depth chart are all injured. We'll see if all 3 miss the game against the Vikings, but we do know the starter, Khalil Herbert, is essentially, hasn't been formally ruled out, but is not expected to play this week and is expected to miss a few games with what's called a high ankle sprain. We'll check in on the running back room and the outside free agent addition the Bears brought in and really brought back into this Luke Getsy offense next on Locked On Bears. The Locked On Bears podcast is brought to you by our friends at LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs is here to help you find the best qualified candidates for your business, because these days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager. You want to be 100% sure that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you got to check out LinkedIn Jobs, because they help you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Let's say your team is down 3 running backs, and you need to go find a good one. Well, LinkedIn has a few running backs on there, I know for sure, but maybe it's the equivalent of a running back at your job. Your business is down a couple people all in the same spot. LinkedIn gives you access to their full catalog of LinkedIn members myself included. I'm on LinkedIn. You're probably on LinkedIn as well. And then they've got simple tools like screening questions that make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience to prioritize who you want to interview and hire. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedonnfl. That's linkedin.com/lockedonnfl to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. I don't understand how the Bears keep getting injuries at all the same positions, but now it's running back, where we saw earlier in the Bears-Commanders game, Roschon Johnson leaves with a concussion. We didn't notice anything. It wasn't like a big, scary stretcher situation, but that just was reported early. He was the first running back to go down, at least in terms of being reported there, ruled out for the game with a concussion, usually, which tells you it wasn't just concussion-like symptoms, but a confirmed concussion. And you look across the NFL, there haven't been a ton of players this season that suffer a confirmed concussion in a game and then play the very next week. There have been a couple of exceptions, but for the most part, most of the prominent players that we hear who suffer a concussion in the game are ruled out with concussion, confirmed, yes, this player suffered a concussion in that game. Most of them have not played the immediate game afterward. Perhaps it's different because the Bears are going from a Thursday night game to a Sunday, so you got an extra 3 days in there to where, I don't know concussion recovery protocol at all, and the NFL, I think, doesn't really either, but the way the NFL treats it, maybe that extra 3 days could be enough to not completely rule Roschon Johnson out as a possibility to still play this week, but not an encouraging sign there, and concussions are always a very scary thing, especially for a physical runner like Roschon Johnson. Then it was revealed that Travis Homer, the third-string running back, hurt his hamstring, I think it was, on special teams, and so he was questionable in the game, but never really stepped back onto the field into that game against the Washington Commanders. And then, of course, Khalil Herbert gets his ankle bent funny on a passing play when he tried to turn back and catch it, and it twisted underneath him. He leaves the game, comes back in the game a couple of plays later, and looks incredibly in pain, like he can't run at all. Was really surprised to see him even try those plays, but then take it out of the game and played, it didn't play from that on. And Kari Blasingame, the fullback, was your only running back for the remainder of that game. So, boom, you're down your top 3 running backs on the depth chart. You got a fullback. We already had D'Onta Foreman sitting on the healthy scratch inactive list for every game so far this, well, not every game, but over the last few weeks of the season. He instantly steps back in as your starting running back this week. They've already said Herbert has a high ankle sprain, is expected to miss multiple games, so he's not going to be ready to go. Unless Roschon Johnson is ready to go after the concussion, D'Onta Foreman will be your starting running back this week. Even if Homer's healthy, it'll still be Foreman. That's sort of the deal here, right? That's why Foreman has been kind of a healthy scratch. Not that he's not any good, but because Homer's a special teams guy, and then Herbert and Johnson have just been better or more of what they want at the running back position. And they went out because they got 3 guys injured, and I think it's a sign that the team is not super confident in those 3 guys being ready to go. They signed an old friend, Darrynton Evans, who was on the Miami Dolphins practice squad. I believe he was on somebody's practice squad. I'm pretty sure it was the Miami Dolphins. And the Bears brought him back onto the 53-man roster. Not just onto their practice squad, but you have to sort of directly sign him to your 53. And Miami would have had the option to match and keep him on their 53, but ultimately letting him go to the Chicago Bears. And he becomes sort of the new backup. And you might remember Darrynton Evans was a member of this team last year. He was a teammate of Kari Blasingame on the Tennessee Titans the year before that. So, A, he has fullback familiarity. B, he has offensive familiarity with Justin Fields and Luke Getsy and everybody else in the system. So he knows he should be plug and play as a backup running back who's also pretty good on special teams. And he's never been like a prolific runner. He's made a couple nice plays as a receiver in the NFL, but he's mostly been a special teams guy. But he has some kick return ability as well. Pretty good blocker. But he's more that, alternate back to Foreman, who will be the lead carrier in this game. And I think I've got a ton of confidence in D'Onta Foreman. He wasn't great in the preseason so far, and there's not to say that I think he's going to be great against the Minnesota Vikings, assuming he does start that game and that Herbert and Roschon Johnson don't play. But D'Onta Foreman was a 900-yard rusher last season for the Carolina Panthers, and he only started half the season. He was McCaffrey's backup till they traded McCaffrey, and then Foreman started the rest of the year and averaged 4.5 yards per carry and 50 yards a game, despite being a backup for the first half of the season. Almost rushed for 1,000 yards in 9 starts. 5 touchdowns in there as well. Like, he's good. He's not a Pro Bowler. He's not a big money guy. There's a reason he's been a healthy scratch. He hasn't been as good as Roschon Johnson and Khalil Herbert comparatively. But he's got some upside there. And especially because I think this Chicago Bears offensive line is blocking well, particularly in the running game, particularly with Tevin Jenkins back in the lineup. And Nate Davis at right guard has settled back in and is playing more like the Nate Davis that we expected coming from the Tennessee Titans. Again, not a Pro Bowl guy, but it is as healthy of an offensive line as we've seen. I mean, I guess Braxton Jones' injury is still looming large there, but Jenkins back at left guard, Whitehair back at center, Nate Davis at right guard, Darnell Wright at right tackle. Like, that was the plan. These are all the guys that practice together, and they've been run blocking well. And as much as like Khalil Herbert has, explosive speed and some of that special ability in the running back room, and Roschon Johnson runs really hard and creates extra yards after contact, for the most part in the NFL, the quality of the run blocking does matter more the majority of the time than the quality of the running back themselves. The back still has to know which gap to, still has to make the right decisions behind it. But if you run block really well, you can have success with a lot of different running backs back there. And if you don't run block very well, then very few backs are going to have a ton of success back there. I'm not here to make this segment a whole argument on the value of running backs, but it's just to say that, like, we've seen Foreman be good, and we've seen this Bears run blocking be better lately. So in theory, it's a pretty good combination that they should be able to run the ball just fine. Doesn't mean they're going to be 150 yards of rushing or anything necessarily, at least with the backs in this game, but I think they're going to be fine in the ground game, even with all those injuries there. And Roschon Johnson should be pretty short-term with the concussion. Khalil Herbert is a high ankle sprain, so I don't know exactly how long that's going to be, but the fact that they haven't put him on injured reserve yet tells me 4 or fewer weeks, but probably more like 2 to 3 and not just a 1-week thing. So it's not a long-term fear at running back, and I think in the short term, your worries are slightly alleviated by trusting Foreman and your offensive line. The Vikings have been pretty darn good in the run defense this season, except for against the Philadelphia Eagles, when for some reason, DeAndre Swift went off for 175 yards on 28 carries. But otherwise, like, they've done pretty good at shutting down the Buccaneers running game, the Chargers running game, and the Panthers running game. So, it's not an easy matchup by any means, but the depth at running back is strong. Maybe the strongest depth of anywhere on this Bears team, and that's the spot where you never want injuries concentrated anywhere, but I think we can get by with injuries there. Plus, you got Kari Blasingame, the fullback, and you got Justin Fields, who's a pretty darn good runner himself, not from the quarterback position. So I'm not too worried there. Plus, you have Jaylon Johnson and company getting healthy and coming back in the defensive secondary, so you feel like you're going to get a little bit better defensively as well. And of course, now the Chase Claypool era is over. So it sort of felt like addition by subtraction with the Bears offense playing its best since Claypool has been sat down. So that's kind of catching us up here on transactions and injury reports and guys being brought in and guys leaving and catching up on past injuries for guys who could be coming back. A lot of moving parts around the Chicago Bears team, even in this mini bye week between a Thursday game and a Sunday game. Before you know it, we're going to be previewing the Bears-Vikings game for our crossover Thursday with Luke Braun from Locked On Vikings. I also want to kind of look at what we've seen the last 2 weeks from this Bears team and kind of get a sense of, like, what are the signs that this success they've had against Denver and Washington is sustainable, that it's not just a fluke, but like they've actually figured some out here? And what are the signs that, yeah, maybe this was just 2 bad defenses and things might start to slow down here, but playing the Vikings and the Raiders, not exactly 2 great teams either. So we'll kind of get into state of the Chicago Bears here moving forward after their first win of the season in the next couple of days here on the Locked On Bears podcast. So make sure then that you hit the subscribe button on YouTube or wherever you listen to podcasts. That's going to be the best way to keep up with all of our daily, in-depth Chicago Bears news and analysis. Thanks for making us your first listen today and hopefully every single day, because you got to come back every day for your next opportunity to bear down.